Okay, that is. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Committee of the Whole meeting of Fernie City Council for November 22nd, 2023, held at 6 p.m. First, Kisuk Yukit, good evening. I'd like to acknowledge that the city of Fernie is located within Kukinamakis, the unceded territory of Yakutat Nucleat. We recognize that we live and work within their vast lands. The Kanahunik are from Yakutat Nucleat and are members of the Tanaha-speaking peoples of British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. I'll call this meeting to order. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we have had some feedback. There's some audio challenges. And we do recognize that, and we are working to address those. So we very much appreciate the constructive feedback that we get from the community. So thank you for that. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda. And we have one late item. Moved by Councillor Audia Kelly, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. At what point do we read the late item into the agenda, Mr. McConnell?
So approve the agenda with the acceptance of the late item of the delegation with the motion. So I would suggest that you said, and we have one late item, that the motion
it's sufficient.
Would be that the agenda is approved with the late item being the delegation.
Mover and seconder seem to approve. Any discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And now ask for a mover and a seconder for the adoption of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held on August 15th, 2023. Moved by Councillor McIsaac, seconded by Councillor Hamilton. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. That's unanimous. I'll now open the floor for public participation and invite the public in attendance or participating electronically who wish to comment on items listed on the meeting agenda in accordance with section 3.7.3 of the procedure bylaw to address council, except speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of the bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given pursuant to the Local Government Act prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit, and a speaker may only address council for a maximum of 3 minutes. And I'll turn to Ms. Chown. Anyone online indicate? Thank you. We'll then move on to item 6.1, delegations, and a presentation on a proposed heritage tree preservation bylaw from Mr. Terry Nelson.
So I'm not going to introduce myself because I think most people in the council chambers know who I am. Is that a correct assumption? So I'm here to speak on behalf of trees because they can't speak. And as other people here may know, I'm a tree researcher, and there's a new term for that. It's called tree searching. So it kind of covers all the bases. So locally in Fernie, I've taken the liberty to document a bunch of the trees within our community. Some are very significant in age as well as species. And when I was under the employ of the city of Fernie, this is going back 7 or 8 years now, there was a particular instance when there was some investigation into actually the city adopting a heritage tree preservation bylaw. And that was prompted when Fernie 901 was being constructed. And I don't know if anybody has this on their screen or anything, but I'm just going to have some of the paperwork that I submitted. But So people may be familiar at the Fernie 901 site where there's a large fall gold black ash spectacular tree it's in the road right away of 3rd Avenue and 9th Street. So the investigations that were undertaken, looking at just a bunch of other municipalities, heritage tree bylaw, to try to create something that tree could be protected, because at the time the developers wanted just to cut it down, and so there was, we did some background work on that with a bunch of different municipalities, namely, Mr. Lennox will be aware of some of the work we did at that time with City of North Vancouver, City of Victoria. I mean, these are large municipalities that have quite robust bylaws, but they all have the sort of information within them that just, it's kind of intended just to kind of create some level of protection for trees so that they don't just fall by the wayside. So that particular tree, I think just sort of whether people have an awareness or not about some of the sort of intrinsic values of what trees are, heritage trees specifically. There's just a general community well-being, and sometimes these type of trees are celebrated trees. Like, oh, there's something happened there or whatever, over the course of time. Then there's values of, for climate change related things, whether it's shade around your house or wind breaks, these type of things. They're also habitat. Large tree creates a lot of habitat for whether it's birds, squirrels, whatever, lots of things you don't see in the tree. So I think there's a lot of values there that that preservation of those trees can act to make sure they stay in the community for a long time. So sort of some of my early discussions when I started looking into this was with Lisa regarding the asset management registry, which is the city, maintains for its infrastructure. And so within treating trees as an asset, they can be data about the tree can be stored there. Regular maintenance can be done. People have questions about, hazardous trees, what do you do? These are all things that with a heritage tree bylaw, once it's given some level or of protection, there can be routine inspections or scheduled inspections, scheduled hazard inspections, scheduled health inspections of the trees so that those trees can be maintained for a long time. I have another sort of case study, which I think is really interesting that also, and I don't know, I get 10 minutes here, right? So can somebody give me have I talked for 5 minutes yet, or when are we going to cut me off? 6? Thank you. So there's a bunch of trees that are referred to as the Royal Jubilee oak trees, of which Fernie has, I believe, 5 of these trees that were planted to commemorate the coronation of King George in 1937. So these trees are planted all out throughout the Commonwealth. Specific ones in Fernie, and I've made some notes here of where some are located. The reason I know about these, it was a gentleman, one of the elders in Fernie, Mr. Eddie Lucas, who lived down by Rotary Park, and I was helping to take care of him in his aged time of his life. And he had this beautiful oak tree in his yard, and he told me the story about the Jubilee oaks, and he went to the post office, as the story goes, and picked up 5 of these seedlings, and these seedlings ended up getting planted all around the city. And so they're quite substantial trees, as you might imagine. Something, they're getting close to 100 years old. Some of the other trees, there's one that's grown just right across from City Hall by the Garage Mahal over there. There's one in West Fernie that's growing in the old high school ballpark field. There's another one over by the RCMP station, which is very substantial. It's the largest one that's growing out of someone's deck in their backyard. It can be seen anywhere near the RCMP station. If you look around, you'll see that tree. So that's just an example. And so the first one I talked about is on city property. Second one I talked about is on private property. Well, not the second one. The other ones are all located on private property. And so from a heritage tree preservation perspective, I would suggest that the city may want to consider just dealing with its own trees initially, mainly because it's something you can manage. You can actually set up an inventory. And this is something I'd be very willing to work. I've collected data on about 70 very significant trees within the municipality of Fernie. I'd be willing to share that information if it's actually going to be put to some good use. So one other tree I'm going to tell you about. Well, my time's running out. So there's another tree, an interior Douglas fir tree, which is estimated to be about 450 years old. So this is a tree that would have survived the Fernie fire. The tree is located at 192 4th Avenue by the old, used to be called the Bonington or Saul Bonnell property. The house that is there, people may notice the Hamilton house or something, you know, it's maybe more current. So one of the things, the reason I'd like to bring that up is there's also a history associated with that tree. So Mr. Bonnell, who built this house in, year was it, 1902, when he built the house there, had the foresight to leave that tree in place. You know, not like a lot of times people just go, got a nice bunch of trees in your way, so you're going to cut them all down. But so he left that. He also planted some various other significant trees on that property, a bunch of ash trees as well as oaks that grace that property. And he has an amazing history. He was the mayor of Fernie at one time. He was doctor. I think it was 1907. He was the mayor. Was a conservative member of Parliament in 1918. You know, so those are the type of things where in a heritage tree preservation bylaw, those are the type of things you attach to the tree. There's history involved. And every tree has some history because they, you know, unless it, you know, whether it survived the fire, that's significant. Did somebody plant it on some day? The Jubilee oaks that I mentioned earlier, they have important history. So, you know, I think that's, there's a whole bunch of other trees of note, and I'm just going to go through those because I'm going to run out here apparently. So in Rotary Park, there's a cottonwood tree. One of them's been cut down because presumed to be a hazard. It's one of the largest cottonwood trees in British Columbia. It's growing right down on the corner of the street in Rotary Park. The BC Hydro House where Don Vingy lives, there's a very large fir there. It's over 280 years old in his yard. In behind the Holy Family School, there's a giant spruce tree there, over 95 years old. Trees that are located on city property, city sewage lagoon property. I don't know if anybody's ever walked around outside the lagoons. The largest cottonwood recorded in British Columbia is there, for over 400 years old. The LaRue Pond. The city owns that property around the lower pond. There's some impressive Douglas fir trees. There's an old apple tree in there. You know, these are all trees that I think that need to be given a level of protection so that they don't just sort of get ignored. Somebody lights a fire, burns them down. I don't know, whatever, you know, they just need to be protected in the long term. In the cemetery, there's some very significant trees. Lodgepole pines. I don't know if people planted those or what they are, you know, what their story is, but there's significant lodgepole pines that are in there. Just driving here today, you know, I drive past the library, whatever that, you know, there's a big fir tree that's in that property. You know, those are all city-owned trees, really. And whether the city has any recognition that they actually own a tree, I don't think so. That's not my impression I have. I used to take care of the trees and plant trees around Fernie. I don't really know what goes on anymore, but I don't think it's very, nobody pays much attention. So I'd like to see that level of attention brought up to a proper level so that things.
One minute, Terry.
1 minute? Okay, so do I have an opportunity to ask questions after my 10 minutes?
Well, we'll ask you questions.
I know, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
absolutely.
Okay. All right, awesome. So people are familiar with the Lombardy poplars that are just on 6th Street. There's a row of them there, and I can't remember the guy's name who used to have those. Those are on city property. Somebody might have planted them out on the boulevard, but regardless, they're under the city's tenure. If they're hazardous, I think one was the city paid somebody to cut it down at one time. I don't know. I might have just run out of things to say. How's that for something unusual for me?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nelson. That's
Yeah,
very,
okay.
very informative and very much appreciate the presentation. And I'll hand it over to council to if they have any questions
Yeah,
or thoughts, comments.
Yeah, I'd like to entertain some questions if I have any.
Well, I can start. I am fully supportive of a tree preservation bylaw, whatever that looks like.
Mhm.
And I'm also supportive of starting small, as you suggest, and identifying, you know, those trees of historical significance to start, because you've named a couple, and I think they are significant. You know, I have had visitors to Fernie sit on our deck and marvel at, you know, we live in an urban forest, and they love that. It's a huge attraction to this town, and I lament every tree we lose, quite frankly, that isn't replaced. So I'm certainly sympathetic to the idea and supportive of the idea. So, Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you. I'm just curious from your research previous that you'd mentioned with other communities, what sort of parameters go around identifying whether a tree has heritage value? Is it an age thing? Is it a species thing? And if you could just explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, generally, what a goal for a broad inventory would be to have trees of many species identified. So, you know, you have that sort of coverage so that if you have some rare tree, and I don't know, it could be the best apple tree in Fernie. I'll use that as an example of which maybe that's not a good one because you want to cut all those down anyhow, but thank you. Yeah, a ponderosa pine tree, for instance. And there was one cut down on a property I used to own just down on 5th Street. There's a new house there on 5th Avenue. The tree's only, 58 years old, but in the case of places like North Vancouver and Victoria, to your point, to your question, is that there's generally a covenant registered on a property that is entered into by the property owner. So there's a bit of, when you enter into the private property realm, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to get somebody on side. But I think my point about starting, with a small scale protection of the city trees, and if promoted properly, like to actually create awareness of what the city's up to. This is a prime opportunity for, to pat yourself on the back. We did this great thing and people get this, they're not all like, oh, they're like, oh, this is kind of cool. Or they might say, geez, the city's sure wasting their time. Why don't they patch the pothole in front of my house? I don't know what they think. But for me personally, I think there's a lot to be gained from promoting it from a bylaw perspective. And sort of the parameters that you referred to us. So that kind of will reflect on inspections. So it happens right away. Yeah, there's a cost incurred, obviously, to have someone come out, whether it's an arborist or you have your own trees, in the places, in case of large municipalities, you'll have a retained arborist who's going to do inspections annually. You do inspections for tree health, you do it for hazards, you do it for so that you can document what the growth perhaps of the tree or certain things like that. So I think within from the bylaws that I've read, it's typically the preservation on a private property. It could even apply to the city-owned property. Is, let's just say you have some, I don't know, proposed works, whether it's building a house or putting a sewer line in or whatever it is, you would create a protection fence around that tree, 3 meters around the outside of the tree, and nobody can go in there. So you don't go and kill it by accident, So those are kind of the parameters usually in place from a lot of the stuff I've read. There's also opportunities where, and I think the mayor spoke to about the loss of a tree. So they'll have in particular cases where you can't save a tree because of whatever, you got to put a road into your new house or whatever. They require compensation like the 1-for-1. And then obviously if you get a 500-year-old tree, 1-for-1 isn't just plant one tree. It could be 5 for whatever those sort of terms are. So I think there's a lot of information that can be applied. And because you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel, there's so many municipalities that already have these bylaws. And I'm sure at a UBCM, you could probably go dig in. I'm sure your planning department here could look into things and come up with some examples to present to you as a draft bylaw that would say, here, this is how we can make it work for Fernie. You tell the public what you're up to. You say, if you start talking about some tree that's 460 years old, you get people's attention. And it's like, wow, city's progressive, like you can give yourself a pat on the back. And then you build from there. Then you go, what response do we get? Do we actually want to go into the realm of private property and control what goes on? Because as Fernie grows, you can lose a lot of things. And heritage trees are just one aspect of it, right? Heritage is heritage. It could be all sorts of things. It could be whatever, just you could pick anything that you like and it's been around for a long time and the community enjoys it. And if you lose it and it's gone forever, there's no going back. So that sort of answer your question. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Mr. Nelson. Any other questions? Councillor Nixon.
There it is. Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks, Terry, Mr. Nelson, for coming in. That's awesome. As you know, our staff is pretty at capacity. Would you be willing to head up a tree society that would do some of this work and then liaise with the
Well, I don't
city?
need a society. I can just do stuff by myself. I'm a champion of things. And so, I've got a lot of data. I've got, like I said, I got 70 trees documented, photos, history, you name it. And then it's all just, a digital file that can be passed on. As far as, your staff, I mean, you got a planning department, just tell them what to do. What are your priorities? I don't know, but make that one a priority. Switch it up a little. It's that simple, really, in my mind, at least. I know it's not, of course, but.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Nelson. And you're right. There are cities across the country. Charlottetown, for example, manages their trees as natural assets, and they do an inventory every year. And of course, when the hurricane blew through there, they had a significant problem in terms of tree replacement. But
they knew what they had.
But they knew what they had.
Them.
Exactly.
That's the key thing right there.
And I have worked, funnily enough, under a tree preservation bylaw, going through university, worked for a construction firm. We built a house on a lot with a heritage sequoia, and you're exactly right. We had to hoard it off to a significant distance so it didn't get damaged. And there was an inspector there, probably the most diligent inspector, was there every day to check that we hadn't damaged that tree. But it also drew the interest of the neighbors because they hadn't appreciated what they had until it was pointed out to them. So I think there's a great deal of value in this. So thanks for bringing it to us, and we'll look forward to working with you to
and I do offer my services, and I'm not the consultant that's going to send you a bill. I just want to see something happen, but I don't want to have to wait too long because I'm getting old.
You're a young man. Thank you for that.
Okay, is anybody else? No, that's good. All right, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you again, Mr. Nelson. We'll move on to item 7.1, Emergency Management Committee, a report from our Deputy Fire Chief, Mr. Robinson.
Is that good volume? Yeah. Your Worship, members of council, thank you for hearing me tonight. I'm here to present a brief overview of the Emergency Management Committee. So the first slide there shows the members of the committee. This committee is an internal City of Fernie Emergency Management Committee. It's not to be confused with the Elk Valley South Country Emergency Management Committee, which is a regional one. This is specific to the City of Fernie, and therefore the committee members are all staff from the City of Fernie. There's 7 of us, all listed there. Well, you see underneath my name, I've also listed Emergency Programme Coordinator. That's why I'm the one up here tonight. I'm sort of volunteered to give this presentation. So we hold the meetings. They're held bi-monthly through the winter, spring and fall. We typically take the summer off because people are on holiday, and therefore we don't really have a lot of people around. So typically meet 5 times a year. And as I say, this is a City of Fernie specific committee. The responsibilities of this committee are to plan for any emergencies and disasters that the City of Fernie may encounter. And so we do that by looking at, first of all, the 4 phases of emergency management. The first phase being mitigation, and if you can read it there, maybe a little small, but this is one area where ideally you should spend all the money. As it says there, every $1 invested in mitigation can save $7 to $10 in post-disaster recovery. So mitigation is things like fuel management that we do up in Ridgemont, raising dikes. It's anything we can do to mitigate risk of hazard happening. And so we look at whatever we can do to address mitigation. We also look at preparedness, preparing our staff, preparing our community in the event that there may be an emergency. Preparedness may be things like getting people to register for the mass notification system so that we can notify them. it's training staff, it's holding family safety days. So that just to get the information out of what to do in the event of an emergency. But it's also preparing the staff in what they may need to do if there's an emergency. We then move on to the response phase. This is the one that everybody remembers because this is what's on the news, the disaster. This is what everybody sees, what everybody remembers. Ironically, it's probably one of the shortest phases of the whole disaster cycle. Generally, a few days, maybe a week, maybe a month at the most is typically how long an emergency or disaster may last. But it's relatively small timescale compared to everything else that we look at. And then the fourth phase is recovery. If there's been an incident, then how do we recover from that? And those last three, the preparedness, response, and recovery, all tying with business continuity. One of the things we're constantly looking at is how the City of Fernie can continue to function if there is an emergency or disaster. And so we try and prepare for the business continuity, what that would look like in a response, and also through the recovery phase. And it's also fair to say that those four phases are cyclical in that if there was to be an incident and we get to the recovery stage, we'd be looking at in that recovery stage what we can then do to mitigate that risk from occurring again in the future so that you go back to the top of the four phases back into mitigation. So it's a constant cycle that we're constantly reviewing. And so through our discussions of those four phases, we generate plans. Some of the plans that are listed there, they're not all of them. But what it's fair to say is we're dealing with emergency disasters. We're not dealing with day-to-day emergencies. They're not there to come up with ideas for how the fire department would respond with a motor vehicle incident. That's a day-to-day emergency. That's handled by the fire department. We're talking those emergencies that are affecting a large number of the population, maybe a few blocks, maybe an entire neighborhood, maybe the entire city of Fernie. So that's sort of the scale that the Emergency Management Committee work to, and those are the plans that we sort of generate from that. We also look at staff training. Part of the preparedness phase is training our staff, and we'll look at what courses are available for our staff there. The courses that typically out there, the JRBC provide online courses. We work with our regional partners so that we can fill these courses. Some are online, some are in-house, in person. It all varies, but we try and make sure that we have trained staff. We also look at holding tabletop exercises. And we didn't hold one this past year, but we're looking at holding one next year around wildfire. And that's where we can bring our staff together and sort of over tabletop exercise, run through some of those plans and make sure that what we've come up with actually works. Obviously, all that costs money. And so we also look into the grants that are available out there. Two main sources of our grants are the UBCM and the CBT. I've been in front of council before asking for council support to, first of all, get our own grants through the Fire Smart, the Community Resilience Initiative, but also partnering with our municipal partners, primarily the RDEK. They quite often will manage grants on the behalf of the entire Out Valley. And so the UBCM have three grants generally in that area, one for emergency support services, which we partnered with the RDK with last year, or this year, I guess, 2023. The emergency operations centres, again, we partnered with the RDK on that one. And then the third major grant is the Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Adaptation Grant. The Emergency Management Committee itself didn't apply for that one this year, but I do believe the engineering department did to provide some mitigation works in some dike work. And I think they got quite a large sum of money out of that grant for that one. And then we also deal with coordinating with our private, public and non-government organisations. One of the main ones is the RDEK. We do sit on the Out Valley and South Country Emergency Management Committee that runs from Alford through to Jeffrey. And so we have RDEK, A and B there, Sparwood, Alford and ourselves. But we also deal with our stakeholders that are in and around Fernie, with the Ski Hill, with Reliance, Fernie Trails Alliance. We try and keep contact with those, keep them involved where necessary so that if we need their support in the event of emergency, then we have those contacts already made. So sort of that's an overarching look at what the committee his objectives are. And so I'd just like to touch on what our focuses are for 2024, so you know what we're looking at next year. First one being the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan. That is a plan that is being funded through the Fire Smart grant that we got in 2023. We have already a wildfire protection plan that's now 5 years old. And they say that a plan lasts for about 5 years and then you need to start reviewing it. And so as part of our Fire Smart grant, we are obligated to have a wildfire resiliency plan moving forward. And so that's one of the objectives for 2024 is to update that protection plan into a resiliency plan and have that for the next 5 years. We also have next generation 911 coming down the line, often referred to as NG 911. That again is has been grant funded. The CRTC federally have mandated that the 911 system, the current 911 system, has to be phased out and replaced with a digital-based system. And so the cost for that is quite huge, but the majority of that money will go to places like ECOM, which provide the 911 service. But for the local level, we still have to do some work around NG 911. That's still sort of being finalized. It looks like there will be an amount of GIS work. So Director Johnson and her team will be probably spearheading that initially. And as we move through this transition to NG 911, if that involves anything else, then excuse me, we can look at that. We have got a grant provided through the province. We didn't even have to apply for that grant because NG 911 was mandated. UBCM, who are managing this grant, basically gave all local authorities a sum of money to do the local NG 911 work, Your Worship.
Sorry, Deputy Chief Robinson, like it's $45,000. Does that feel like enough money, or is that just to get the ball rolling money?
That's to get the ball rolling. Correct. Every municipality was allocated $45,000. They didn't allocate all of the money that UBCM have been provided by the provincial and federal governments. And UBCM themselves don't quite know how they're going to handle all this money. They have left some aside. And so their thinking, though not guaranteed, is that at some point in 2024, 2025, there will be like an open session where you can then apply for more money if you've got projects that need further funding. It should have said that the mandate currently is that NG 911 will be, or the old system will be phased out and the first phase of NG 911 in place by March 2025. And the work that Director Johnson's team have identified is GIS work. Essentially, we have to improve the GIS we report, and so that if a 911 call comes in, it now works off latitude and longitude, for example, rather than, say, triangulating 3 cell towers. So I think there's some GIS work there. And that's sort of what we've identified at this stage, but moving into 2024, there may be additional work as well. And so those first two are funded. That work is funded through grants. The next two aren't necessarily currently funded. We're still looking at grants for those. But on November the 8th this year, the Emergency Programme Act was replaced by the Emergency and Disaster Management Act. The Emergency Programme Act focused purely on response. And if you think back to when I was talking about those 4 phases, response is sort of like the third of the 4 phases. The Emergency and Disaster Management Act is now going to focus on all 4 phases. We currently have an emergency response plan. And again, the word is in the time there. It's a response plan. So we're going to have to look at that. There's an act that basically says our plans have to address all 4 stages of emergency management. And whilst we have done that, as long as I've been in emergency management for 10 years, we've always focused on the 4 phases. Plans typically were response-based. And so we now need to go back to some of these plans and look at the other areas as well. So hopefully there'll be funding coming through. We do have grants available possibly in March. We're still working through the small print of that to see if they can apply. But if they don't, then I guess we'll have to find them somewhere else. But there's an act in place, so we have to deal with it. And then finally, the hazard risk and vulnerability assessment. That's sort of tied in with the emergency response plan update. Both those plans are from 2015, so they're 8 years old, so they're well beyond their 5-year lifespan, so they definitely need a review. So that's just a quick overview of what the Emergency Management Committee does. Hopefully, you understand what we do, what we're looking at in 2024, and if you've any questions, fire away.
Council, any questions? Councillor Ramadas.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just wanted to understand a little bit about tabletop exercise. What exactly happens in there?
Okay, Your Worship, through to Councillor Ramadas. Tabletop exercise, it's a stress-free environment where I've done it myself for the RDEK, put together a scenario, for example, wildfire scenario. We will start with an initial scenario for that. A group of people get together, they'll discuss their plans, how they would address with that initial situation. And then we'll start to add injects into this. And so after 30 minutes where they'll be discussing how they would plan for and deal with this particular emergency, we'll then escalate it typically. And we'll sort of move through every 30 minutes, we'll add a new inject, which will move them through the various operational periods of an emergency, and hopefully get them from the point of view of initial startup, how they deal with that, all the way through to letting the residents back into their properties, look at the business continuity around that, and then the recovery. But it's stress-free. It's not role-playing. You're not on a scene. It's not, for example, like you had this weekend where you were actually dealing, hodling tools and so on. It's sort of table set up like this and stress-free. It's people are told to bring their plans. It's not a test. We're trying to set people up for success. And it's just an avenue for them to work through the plans and practice ahead of time, should it ever be needed.
Further?
Just one more question, Your Worship. Yeah, just it looks like it's more like an organizational, how do you organize yourself sort of a scenario there? Does it actually take into consideration the current situation of our fire hall and where the crew is and
it would do, yeah. When we were to hold a tabletop in the city of Fernie, yes, it will be based around the city of Fernie as on the day that the tabletop is running. Yeah.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. Just before I get to my actual question, I just want to say I've actually been very fortunate to sit through a couple of tabletop exercises right here, and they were very illuminating and enjoyable to do. And it'd be great if we had the opportunity to do that again, although as the policy group, we're not really needed for that sort of thing, but it was very educational to see how everybody coordinates what's going on. There's, it's like playing Dungeons and Dragons. You're on the tabletop sort of talking about what's happening, and somebody is describing to you what's going on as decisions are making. But it was very, very illuminating. What my question was, Your Worship, was with regards to the 4 areas in emergency management, including things like mitigation. And I'm wondering, and this may or may not be a question for the Deputy Chief, are we closing the loop on that on our staff planning? So we've done things over the last number of years like raising dikes and so on. I'm curious to know how much of that is feeding back into the emergency management, how much is coming out of emergency management that is helping to drive the prioritization of those things and so on. How are we sort of closing that loop and making the city a safer place?
Deputy Chief, do you take an active role in that sort of level of coordination? Because you did mention the adaptive management in terms of learning from disasters and moving forward. Are we also learning from what we're doing as a city?
Oh, yeah, Your Worship, through to Councillor McIsaac. Yes, as, the 7 representatives on that committee, pretty much there's 1 director from every department. And so they bring to the meetings what they're working on, what their plans are, what they've done. So, for example, the flood response plan, Director Hausler and Engineer Weir provided an update to that plan this year based on work that has recently been completed. And even though the response plan isn't listed as an action item for 2024, I do think that we will go and make a few minor tweaks to that based on the dike work that's now occurring at Mount View. For example, the response plan has trigger points. So when water levels hit certain levels, it triggers certain actions of staff. And it may be that we can raise some of those trigger points. So when that work is completed, yes, then the engineering department will advise us through the director. And if that means an update to the plan, then we'll make that update.
Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just curious about the funding, and it doesn't sound like there's any definite funding for this project. And I'm just wondering about your scope of work for this. Is it like this part of your desk, or is it half of your desk, or is it going to be a new desk that's going to be beside the desk you have? Just curious about that.
Your worship, through to Councillor Nixon. You make a good point. Emergency management has historically been an off the side of the desk project or assignment for whoever's been in charge of the emergency program coordinator role. When the city came up with the deputy chief role this past 12 months, it was part of that was to provide more time for the emergency program coordinator. So it's not on the core of my desk. It is a key component of my job, as long as being deputy chief. So the city of Fernie has identified that and have employed somebody to put that time and effort in. With regards funding, do you mean to the response plan and the act?
Yeah, just the new requirements. There seems to be a lot of will be required for thorough risk assessments, and enhanced emergency management plans will be required. So I'm just, there seems to be a lot of strong language in this act.
Yes, as you mentioned, it only came into force on November the 8th. They being EMCI, Emergency Management Climate Readiness, do recognize that a lot of plans do need to be reviewed. They are not, the plan is, the act isn't, and even though it's in force today, they realize it's going to take 2 to 3 years to phase in everything. The Emergency Program Act was last updated in 1996. This Emergency and Disaster Act is basically just coming up to date with what everybody does anyway now, to a large degree. They are focusing on climate readiness. A lot of our identified hazards are climate related anyway, flood and wildfire are the two main ones in the city of Fernie. So we deal with climate, or have been dealing with how climate can affect hazards in our area anyway. With regards to funding, I think the grants are there. We just need to ask the question of the grant providers if they will allow us to use that grant in that way. And if they don't, I'm pretty confident, because the government have brought in this act, that they're going to have to provide funding, because we're not the only ones in this situation. Nearly every plan out there is a response-based plan and needs review. And so they will have to provide some money somewhere. I'm fairly certain of that. And as I say, I think the grant in March, sorry, time's out in March. That's the application deadline. Just sort of cover it, but it's a bit vague. But their literature did come out prior to this act coming into force. So we need to ask that question. We've got 3 months. And if we have to delay it into 2025, then we'll have to delay it till 2025. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're not planning for that. As I said, we still plan around the 4 phases anyway. Even though our plan says it's a response plan, we do have the paperwork behind it that deals with all the, and we are discussing a plan for all 4 phases, regardless of the fact that it's only just been brought into an act.
Thank you for that. And thank you for that question, Councillor Nixon, because I share those concerns reading your report, that it's vague grant funding possibilities make me a bit nervous in terms of the resource requirement for you and your team to implement all this. And as such, you know, whatever we can do in terms of phone calls and lobbying on your behalf to ensure that those funds are available and they're available for the city of Fernie to advance these issues that are being mandated by a higher level of government. Yeah, please keep us informed, because it feels like a bit of a vulnerability. Not that you're not doing the work, and we know you are, and we respect the work you do for us, but we don't want to leave you or the city exposed if we if we're short funding for any of these stages.
Mhm. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I know this past 2023, where you went to UBCM, you went with some concerns, and I'm pretty confident that come 2024, if we're being forced down a route and the funding isn't there, then we'll be coming to you to bring that up at UBCM as well.
Thanks. Yeah, we'd appreciate that. Any other questions from council? Thank you, Deputy Chief. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Thank you.
Item 7.2, review of proposed policy project phase 1 from our HR manager, Ms. Neal.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm before you this evening to discuss a report that is provided to support Council in considering a staff initiative within the HR work plan to address old, outdated, unenforced, unsocialized policies and related procedures, and to amend Council policies that ought to be classified as administrative policies. So just a bit of background, all municipalities are recommended to have a collection of human resources and employee-related policies and procedures that would support fair and equitable operations, a respectful work environment, and ensure consistency in the application of standards. Policies and procedures are needed for 4 main reasons. They provide leaders with a structured approach to administering the daily operations of the municipality in a fair, consistent, and efficient manner. They're like the framework, the foundational tools for communicating information to both employees as well as the leadership and management group related to specific common concerns. They communicate the expectations and responsibilities of all individuals within the municipality, including employees and leaders, and provide guidance for resolving conflict that may arise. And they aid the employer in exemplifying consistency and fairness in the event of a legal complaint or investigation. Staff believe repealing the outdated, unenforced, unsocialized policies will establish a clean foundation upon which to build a framework of best practice, legislatively compliant, consistently trained, socialized, and enforceable policies. Further, accurately assigning human resource and administrative policies as such will enable an organization to make amendments and review more efficiently, update and operationalize those policies that establish the rules and expectations that are equitably applied to all employees. Council will note in the table of policies listed below, and here's just an overall summary of further what's in the report. There's a multitude of historical policies that are unnumbered, incomplete, outdated, or simply should be redeveloped as administrative policies. Staff are recommending the repeal of these policies at this time, either as existing standards, either exist in legislation within the collective agreements or other policies. And in the future, new and more appropriate policies could be reviewed, refined, and developed. It's worth noting that critical administrative policies that are currently in the council category would be shifted to the administrative standards and out of the governance realm. So the continual operation and application until the period of review and renewal or amendments would occur are not opening us up to any liabilities where we would be without said policy. It would just be moving it from the council realm into the administrative realm, and then review, amended, repealed, or adopted as applicable. If council supports the recommendations of staff presented in this report this evening. a
Sorry, Ms.
further-
Neal.
Yeah.
Sorry. Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question, Your Worship, is moving from one realm to the other, what practical difference does that make for someone within the organization who falls under one of these policies?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor McIsaac, from like an employee perspective, it wouldn't impact. It would just move it from the council to administrative and then enable the administration team to review and amend and update and then socialize it for the whole group once it's ready, if it is refined or amended.
Thank you.
Councillor Sue Smith.
Thank you, Your Worship. As a boots on the ground kind of guy, I'm most definitely partial to cleaning up the amount of administrative rules that are around, but I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this. Moving that from this table into the bowels of City Hall. I'm just not 100% sure how I feel about that.
Oh, fair comment. Councillor Ramanus.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm also I'm in agreement with Councillor Shoesmith there. If there are provincial standards and higher level of government standards that we are not following, I'm in support of them if you want to like streamline them. But if there are some undefined policy types and they are not subservient to provincial legislation or whatever, let it stay there. Why fix if it's not broken? And moreover, asking for repealing some of these things is a little too aggressive. I feel like if there is another policy that needs to come in lieu of the one that we are wanting to replace, I would be okay to consider that. But just saying repeal all these, we got to think long term on this. Because the way I see it is when I look at some of these dates here, right? Folks in 1980s, 1990s, one law from 1905. So it's like there is a heritage value here. There's collective wisdom around the council that has come up with these things, and they were done for a reason. And I'm appreciative of folks who've been in this seat years and years ago. So let's be a little respectful of their wisdom also before we go full on and repeal these things.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand policies made in 1905 that are no longer relevant to our operations today are I can't comment one way or another at the moment, but potentially archived, provided we don't lose anything in terms of governance. But I will share, I do share a little bit of your hesitation here, not least because, and I know you've sort of commented, Ms. Neal, that there is legislation in place that will manage how we do business, will be held to employment standards, for example. And that will limit our exposure to liability or any legal action. But I do worry a little bit. I think Councillor Ramanas's comment about repealing a policy without knowing what we're replacing that policy with, whether it's, and I also fully appreciate that there's likely administrative policy manual that should not reside at the council chamber, because you need to run the city and you need to administer the HR policies, and that I fully appreciate that. But I do worry about a schedule that asks us to repeal all these without knowing a timetable specifically of which ones will be replaced when, with what. It feels a little bit absolute in this case. I was as I was reading through them all, I was moving some over to, I have questions about at what point service recognition, for example, I appreciate it should go over to an HR administrative policy, but repealing it, what are we then relying on until such time as that's either recrafted as administrative policy or replaced with a new policy?
So if I may,
Please.
so for that, for example, it would be shifted. So the same policy from being deemed as a council policy would then be shifted as is into the administrative policy. And then the review and updates, we would have more ability to do those in a timely manner. In regards to how to prioritize which policies are updated, like that's a part of the grander HR work plan. And as well, we would be using council's strategic plan, as well as the employee culture, values, mission, vision work that's being advanced to prioritize those that would support those strategic plans. And then the priority would occur with those guiding documents, and then in order and ability with resources between corporate admin and myself and the administrative staff.
Thank you. Councillor Odia Kelly.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. Just drawing a little bit on what Councillor Ramadas said and some things that you have said, moving them out of the purview of council and into administration, does that then negate the ability of council to have any input? Maybe some of these policies were under the purview of council because it was deemed wise for council to have some input into them.
So by your question, you're suggesting there's maybe a deeper review required of decisions that were made.
And if I may, through your worship to Councillor, many of the information and the files relevant to it is quite old, outdated, unavailable. Some policies included in here were either undefined or deemed council when they are administratively. And speaking to the history, I can only speak to my experience since I've been with the city over 5 years. But as you mentioned, some going to 1990, 1980s. I think, pardon? Yeah. I would also add that just like the staff sizes at those times, like the HR manager has only been within 2 years. I'm gonna guess that administration teams were much smaller, and how they came about, I can't speak to, and why it was decided where council was in the governance realm of these administrative policies that impact employees and operations within the city.
Thank you. Councillor Ramadas.
Thanks, Your Worship. I wouldn't really characterize many of them as outdated either, because I just picked this gem from 1989. It says all staff shall provide a written report after attending a conference or a seminar. While I'm not expecting people to write report, but the spirit behind it is trying to understand, what is the knowledge or skill set you brought from a conference and how is it applicable to the city. Mm-hmm. So we got to be mindful of why this was put in place in the first place. Just my thought.
Councillor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. I think we should be mindful that it will still be in place. It just doesn't have to come to council each time. It's actually dealt with at the staff level, and we actually have staff that does that now and didn't used to, which is why we have photocopier policy in here and Christmas card policy and ridiculous things like that. Those things should absolutely not be at the council table. The vast majority of these have no reason to be at the council chamber at all. We now have staff to do it.
I can't disagree. Although, as I look at the schedule here, many of these are repeal and redevelop. So if we repeal them tonight, then they're off the books, and they then need to be redeveloped, and we don't have a timeline for that. Mr. McConnell.
If I may, Your Worship, you wouldn't be repealing them tonight because the committee of the whole cannot repeal an existing policy. It would have to go to a council meeting for repeal.
Fair.
And if I may further, I think the proposal is more of an ultimate, and then the rationale in the column beside it is then indicating when it's shifting from the council to the administrative standard.
Yeah, I guess that's not clear to
Okay.
me exactly what that means. So, respecting Councillor McIsaac's comment about city Christmas party policy, for example. Appreciate it needs to move to an administrative standard. The proposal it be repealed and redeveloped as administrative standard, fine. When does that happen? Like, there's no schedule attached, there's no work plan and I fully appreciate, Ms. Neal, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but that this is part of your work plan. But there are some policies in here, in my mind, that we can't necessarily rely on past practice to define the interim period before we get a new policy. Not least of all because we've seen historically there's been significant changeover in staff. People, we lose institutional memory. If we're all raptured off the earth tomorrow, some of us will be left behind, I think. We will lose institutional memory, and as such, we don't want to be caught without a valid policy that we can rely on at any point. And to my mind, it requires a schedule as to when these things will happen, so that we know as a council that the city continues to run without a hiccup through this transition process. Does that make sense?
So more, you are if I may, you're looking for more identifying when all of these would be shifted from council to administrative, and then in order of review and amendments, which if they are shifted out of the governance realm of council and into the administrative, then the admin team would be dictating those priorities.
But then, do you then have a policy you can rely on?
Yeah, so we
If
would
it's-
shift it from, sorry if I may.
Yeah.
So the Christmas party would still occur. We would move from a council policy to an administrative policy. We would continue to operate as is. And then a proper review with the proper people and the amendments would then occur in that manner without having to come to council for the tweaks and refinements. So we'd still be using these policies, just moving them from council policies to administrative policies. And then we would be doing the review and being able to get more efficiencies in those amendments as a team, as an administrative team.
So we would be, so in that circumstance, we would be repealing this as a council policy
And shifting it to an admin.
and
policy.
shifting it to an admin policy.
So we'd continue to have a Christmas party and the policy. And then as we have capacity and priority, we would then look at reviewing, refining them.
Okay, because that is
amending
not
them.
clear to me.
Okay,
here.
I apologize.
Because things like a discipline policy, when you say repeal the discipline policy, and I appreciate it should be moved over as administrative HR policy, fine. But the word repeal suggests it's
Okay.
suspended and we're no longer operating under that policy until such time as it's been reestablished and potentially redefined.
So I apologize. I should have included more repealing from the council realm, shifting it to the administrative realm, and then the amendments, repeal or reviews.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize for that.
More clear.
Okay.
Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to know where I get my photocopying done.
The library?
But no, seriously. But seriously, no, like I look at this and I see a lot of these policies. And when was the last time that we sent flowers or a donation of equal value of $50 to a long-term resident or pioneer of the city? So, I mean, my point is, if these policies are not being followed, are they not de facto not policies anymore?
Well, I think you're missing my point. And my point is, some of these policies are functioning policies we operate under today.
Mhm.
And I wanted some clarity as to what's going to happen to them in the interim when we repeal them. And so Ms. Neal has provided that. I'm not concerned about the gift policy, quite frankly, to community pioneers. But I think we do need to pay attention to things like a discipline policy, because that has serious consequences for us.
Yes, so
as a
if I may,
community.
we would not open ourselves up to risk where we wouldn't have a discipline policy.
I
It
understand-
just no
I
longer
understand
be
that now. Thank
council,
you.
yeah.
Councillor Hamilton, then Councillor Ravenous.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say thank you for that clarity, because I was a little bit unsure myself. But that certainly clarifies it and makes it a lot more appeasing for me to move forward in this direction.
Councillor Ravenous.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to unpack the process a little bit here. The policies, whatever, it's fine. I just want to understand, like, how does this particular file emerge to the council? Like, as you've seen, Ms. Neal clearly needs a lot of work. So I'm just wondering, like, what's the process here that brings it up to the council level when still a lot of work needs to be done on this?
If I may, Your Worship, through, just to clarify, sorry, in regards to the process on how I would then be,
No, just in terms of, like Mayor Milligan mentioned, you need another policy that needs to come up. We don't know when it is coming, right? There's no timeline on many of these things. So there's lots of nitty-gritties involved here. And not all policies are of the same weight here. There's gift and whatever that thing is, and then there is HR disciplinary stuff, which is a lot more important to the functioning of the organization. So they're not all made equal either. So I'm just wondering, like, how did we prioritize? How did this come up? And why did we think this is important to come up to the council of the whole if that background work wasn't done?
if I may, the background work in identifying which HR related policies are within the council realm is what also helped bring this forward in order to start with a blank slate to identify the old, outdated, or unenforced policies that are currently living within the council realm that should be in the administrative realm. So then as policies are identified to build the framework of the HR department, realizing that many of these are within the council policy type, it then requires us to come to council. So I've brought all these forward because there was substantial background work done on this in identifying which of these policies are slightly HR related and that should come forward, so that then as we build the foundation of like an employee manual, where when we hire and onboard staff, we can provide them with like a guiding document of the expectations and responsibilities of how to go to a training course, or what happens if your performance needs managed, and where are those. As of right now, it stands, they're not very well socialized, enforced, or followed. And much of that is also because many of them are in the council realm from the 1990s.
Thank you. Councilor Kaiser.
Thank you, Worship. With the clarity from my original question about the fact that there's no break in the enforcement of any policy that's actually in use, because it's simply moving from the governance table to the management table. And far and away, everything I've looked at on this list here is clearly falls more under management than under governance, with the possible exception of freedom of the city, which really feels like that should be something that we should be able to bandy about whenever we like. All kidding aside, though, these are clearly management issues, not governance and policy issues from the perspective of this table. Understanding that there's no moment in time where the policy is not in effect. It's merely who is affecting it that is changing. In that case, I'm happy to support that. I think I'm a big fan of getting rid of excess laws
Mhm.
whenever necessary and moving them to management functions. So that's an efficiency gain right there. So I'm supportive.
Councillor Audia Kelly, did you have a? No. Councillor Smith and then Councillor Ramirez.
Thank you, Your Worship. I find this effort extremely laudable, that we would seek to increase efficiencies and reduce the amount of redundancy in our laws. I think it's really well placed, and I think this is a worthy effort. However, what doesn't sit right with me about this is that it's a small thing, but moves the center of gravity away from this table and more into administration, which from the perspective of the public is often a magic little black box that operates completely impervious to, well, anything they say or think. So in principle, this is I really appreciate what's being done here, but I never thought I would say that I'm not in favor of culling laws. This is weird for me. I just don't feel good with that shift of gravity.
Councillor Ramirez.
Councillor Shoesmith stole my words actually, and just want to comment on Councillor McIsaac's point there, Your Worship. I don't think there is full-on consensus here that all of these are policy and your comment there, Councillor McIsaac, that all of these are, in the realm of managers and not really at the policy table. I don't quite agree with that. We can't generalize that. There are certain elements here that are policy realm questions, and that needs to be at this table. And more importantly, I don't know what problem we are trying to solve here. If we didn't do anything on this today, what's the impact going to be? Like, that's unclear to me right now.
Well, I think the impact would be anytime there's a revision to a policy, it would then have to come to this table for approval. And I'm not sure that's particularly efficient or valuable use of this table's time. Because there are standards and best practices in which municipalities operate under, and creating an HR manual that you can share with incoming employees is incredibly valuable and useful. And and you're able to update it, Ms. Neal, with in line with best practice. I think is as you need. I think that's why we hire you and employ you as a HR professional, and that I support that role. I think though, if we're to advance this, there needs to be a level of clarity about, so that if we advance this in the public eye, or when we advance this in the public eye in terms of ultimately making a resolution toward this, whether we do or not, I think there needs to be some clarity as to what it means. For my questions in terms of struggling with the continuity of policy at the city. Because I don't personally have any objection to these things residing with administration, and many of these, potentially not all, and I think that's a fair comment. I think we need, and I would encourage those councillors who have identified ones that they think are policy questions and not administrative questions to speak to those, because that's, and won't put you on the spot to do it at this meeting, but provide this table with that feedback, because otherwise, Ms. Neal is going to have to ask the question on every one, which is unfair.
I can, Your Worship.
Okay.
I'll make an effort to do that.
Thank you. And I do, there's one in particular that I sort of stumbled over, and that was the alcohol and drug abuse one, which is a policy of support, a recognition of alcohol and drug addiction as a disease and support. And I don't think that's necessarily covered under our occupational health and safety standards or WorkSafe BC, for example. I think there are like that. The language in that policy was quite distinct from all the other ones in terms of our commitment to help our employees. So there are some that, in my mind, need kind of a closer look that way. If that
Yep, if I may, identifying those individual ones would be very helpful, but yes, that one would be embedded in then the disability management standard and program.
Thank you.
Mhm.
See, that's the kind of clarity that is very, very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from council? I'd ask. Oh, Mr. Baranowski, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, I have the sense that council is looking for additional information on how the continuity of policy protection is applied, and then would be supported in a dialogue of which of these are very much administrative and which of these are council policies that should be repealed and which of these are council policies that should be considered for update in the future. From your dialogue, I'm hearing that there are a few considerations at play. Some of them, quite frankly, we need the ability to manage as administrative policies and respond to changing legislation or best practice. Items such as the exempt staff overtime or compressed work week policies are in conflict with each other, are adopted by council, and are thus can't be enforced and need a report written, brought to council for a resolution. And those really are specifically accountabilities that your employee and then their employees should be managing on behalf of council based on your governance lens, your values, your mission, your vision, strategic priorities, rather than having council acting as de facto department heads or program managers at that level. But I do appreciate that from the dialogue, I think council is looking for some additional detail to provide comfort on continuity, ideas on prioritization, and the ability to mark which need to remain within the council realm. Is that accurate?
I think that's exactly right. And I think, and you know, I'm sympathetic, Ms. Neal, because I suspect you weren't expecting this pushback, but I don't want it to feel like pushback. It's just exactly that, a level of clarity. So the one I just raised, the alcohol and drug abuse, it doesn't say here that it would be then housed and managed in our disability management process. That gives me a great deal of comfort.
Okay.
But in order to make a decision, that's kind of the level of detail I would like as to what, not just the continuity, but that it continues to serve our employees somewhere, which I guess is the continuity. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mr. Baranowski.
If I can, to council and your worship, repealing and replacing old and outdated policies and addressing the challenging policies that do create obstructions to our business is one of the key items in Ms. Neal's HR work plan as she develops her department and needs to build a defensible employee manual. So you'll see this come back to you because it's a priority for us in being able to effectively manage the day-to-day business of the organization. So you can expect that detail to come forward. I don't think significant homework is required on your part because you'll find additional detail will come forward from Ms. Neal and our administration team in a future report that allows us to respond to some of the dialogue here at the table.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Neal. I know you're aware of all the background and you've done all that work, and it's just a little bit more detail to give me and I think some others comfort in how we advance this. Because as I say, I have no interest every time a policy, an administrative policy is reviewed, that it has to come to the council table. I mean, we delegated, variances, for example, that has saved a ton of staff time. So I'm not interested in creating more work for you, but in the short term, I'd appreciate a bit more background detail in this before we move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll pause while Mr. McConnell plugs in his computer. Okay, thank you. Item 7.3, sanitary force main erosion assessment along the Elk River. A report from project engineer Line.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's kind of exciting to come to council and not ask for money and to provide a positive report. So I'm going to enjoy this tonight. So let's do a little background of this sanitary force main. The city's 450 millimeter diameter HDP, which is high density polyethylene force main, directs our sanitary from town by pumping via the main sewage pumping station and the Riverside pumping station to our wastewater treatment plant that's located south of town. It was installed in 1990, and since construction, the Elk River, which it crosses twice and runs alongside, has seen two significant flooding events, 1995, 2013, and the typical seasonal ebbs and flows of a meandering river that have altered the banks and the riverbed. Erosion concerns were raised by the property owner along this little dotted stretch of the Elk River, and staff directed consultants to assess the current condition of the site and determine if there were concerning issues at two locations. First, shown in the browny purple oblong on this screen, is the segment of main that runs parallel to the river, where erosion of the bank has been reducing the distance between the main and the river. And two, across the river, shown in orange, a scour assessment of the crossing, where the riverbed cover over the pipe may be compromised. So on the bank erosion, we're actually looking at the bank in question on the right-hand side of that image. And you can see there's water, then gravels, and then it goes into the field area. The consultant drew data from the record drawings, site inspections, as well as a bank migration analysis using historical aerial photos. And going into more detail on the bank migration analysis, the consultant placed 5 control points along the main to measure the changes that have occurred over the years. Overall, bank erosion parallel to the force main is flood driven. So the worst things happen in those 1995 and 2013 events, and they only see minor erosion occurring in the other years. Along the study reach, the bank is at least 32 meters away from the force main right now, which is a sufficient setback, and the force main along the river is currently not at risk. Secondly, scour at the crossing. Similar to the first part of the investigation, the consultant reviewed the record drawings and performed site investigations and drew data from other Elk River studies to provide an assessment. The best way to assess the scour at a river crossing is to do what's called a bathymetric survey, which maps the ground under the water, but we didn't have the budget to perform that survey. Based on visual inspections of the shore, there were no signs of significant bed scour over the force main, and the crossing appears to be stable and suitably protected against future flood events. So all in all, this was a great investigation, and a lot of comfort has been given by this. The analysis found no immediate risks to our force main along the edge of the Elk River or the crossing. Furthermore, we have some steps to take to track future erosion along the stretch of pipe and the trigger of when we want to use those steps. And the trigger is the next major flood event, because that's when they saw the most action happening. Staff should complete a visual assessment of the crossing. And if the assessment points to potential scour, then we could then action a bathymetric survey to really determine the remaining cover on the pipe. And for along the river edge, we should also reassess the distance from the bank to the force main to continue to track that bank erosion. And potentially what we might do next year and action some budget for is to install some benchmarks, which make it very easy to just do a measure off a point every time to do that tracking. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Engineer Line. Councillor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. That's a great report. Thank you. Have we spoken to the property owner at all yet?
If I may, so we did do some site visits and spoke with the property owner, and then I wanted to provide my report here before then going back to the property owner. We do want to close that loop.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in light of the Cochrane sewage spill, let's say this property sells and it goes to somebody else and they don't know that that line's there, and then they all of a sudden start doing some digging. Do we have any sort of thing that says big sewer line or something like that, on that area? Because Cochrane I lived in Cochrane and it's absolutely horrible for the Bow River for that sewage spill.
If I may, there is no big signs that say caution sewer main here, but there is a right of way so that when you do purchase the property, you are supposed to be informed of that. Like, you know, this is what's running under your property. So perhaps if we install benchmarks, we can also post a sign of here's what's here.
Yeah, I think that's probably prudent in terms of, to Councillor Nixon's point, caution if the property owner is amenable and we have the right on our right of way to post something. I think that's wise. Councillor Shoesmith.
Thank you. Not quite pertinent, but I just got to know because I'm really curious. Is there any kind of buried warning tape above that or anything?
If I may, to be honest, I'm not sure if there is. Sometimes you'll have like a metallic tape running up above an HDB force main to make it easier to find, which I assume that's what Councillor is. And I'm not sure in this case.
Thanks. I just had to know because, yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm not going to tell you.
Thank you. Other questions? Councillor Audie Kelly.
At engineer line, this is just pure curiosity. The pipe that would be subject to scour, do we have like a frame of time where we should be worrying about it? Like, do we need to be setting some money aside and potential harm to the river, that kind of thing?
If I may, then what the consultants found was that any issues would not happen in a normal year. It would just be after a flood year. And I did work for the city of Calgary during the 2013 floods and was overseeing the rehabilitation of the pipes in that river, both rivers, the Bow and the Elbow, after that major flood event. And what's interesting about scour, sorry, I'm going to nerd out a bit, is that sometimes the river will like really draw a lot of things downstream and you'll have nothing or very little over a pipe, and then it will actually rebuild naturally. So scour can ebb and flow. But what the consultant found in this report is that currently we do not have concerns, but we would only look visually after the next flood event, determine if we should do that bathymetric survey to really pinpoint the remaining depth over the pipe, knowing that it could change, it could reestablish itself naturally, or if at that point we may have to add in some more stuff above the pipe. So we do not need a budget right now, just because the pipe has already been through 2 flood events and it has been okay.
Or it travels downstream and creates a side channel near the sewage treatment plant that could potentially be an issue.
Let's not like foreshadow the next presentation.
Councillor Smith and Councillor Ramirez.
One final question here. What's the approximate cost of a bathymetric survey?
If I may, I believe it's rather minimal, about 5,000 or so. I think it also depends on the time of year, how you can get out. Sometimes there's little boats that do it, or people. So.
Councillor Ramirez? Okay. Mr. Baranowski.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Council and to Councillor Audie Kelly's question, which is a good insight. We do have life cycle modeling and costing in our integrated capital plans. And that is part of our overall infrastructure obligations over the next 20, 30, 50 years. That's part of the work we have to do moving forward in terms of updating some of our asset life cycle costing and then starting to more adequately fund reserves for replacements, because we do have a significant deficit, as do almost all municipalities across almost all of Canada. But that's not to say it isn't real. It is an infrastructure deficit. So it is a good question. The figures for life cycle estimates and replacement costs are a little dated, but we do have them, and we can work on updating those as we continue to invest in asset management over the short, medium, and long term.
Yeah, that's helpful. And also, you know, there's the notion that, particularly given climate change, that 19 years of history is predictive of the next 20 years of history, or what will be history, is a little bit. I know you would never rely on that, and you certainly, your report suggests that, you know, if there were a flood event, we will go and review the situation, actively review it. But yeah, it's becoming increasingly unpredictable as to what the impacts will be, and potentially impacts to our infrastructure accordingly. Councillor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm just curious, how many other pipes are there that go under the river in our city? Is this the only one, or are there more?
If I may, there are a few more pipes. This force main crosses the river right after it exits the main pumping sewage station in Mount View. So and then there are some sanitary siphons and water main crossings. I don't have the number. Neither does anyone else off the top of my head, but I'd say less than 10. Yeah. Yes. And not only the Elk River, Coal Creek also has 2 pipes. No, 5 potentially. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Engineer Line. I appreciate the update. Item 7.4, wastewater treatment system assessment and compliance strategy. A report from our acting manager of engineering, Mr. Baird.
Thanks, Mayor Milligan. Just getting set up here. There it is. Okay, thanks everyone for having me and bearing with me while I get the PowerPoint set up. I'm here tonight to provide a project update on the wastewater treatment system assessment and compliance strategy project that we've been working on for the last year and a bit. Quick recap on this project. It was initiated in order to address the city's non-compliance of sewage discharge related to the frequency of river discharge and decreased reliability on our rapid infiltration basins. The city is currently, or has now, applied for a new permit for full-time river discharge under the municipal wastewater regulation. Staff last reported to council back in March of this year, at which time we summarized the project plan that we had with our consultants. And now I'm here and at which time, I guess, we talked about our plan and what we would be doing over the next year and a bit. And since that time, we've now received our application instruction document from the Ministry of Environment. And that's essentially the contract between the city and the province that outlines what we will ultimately work towards and submit come the deadline. We've been working on our sampling program throughout 2023. That's been one of the major components this year, which I'll get to in a little bit more detail in a moment. We've initiated our Indigenous consultation, applied for a heritage inspection permit, as well as started some of the other accompanying plans that are required for our final application. We're currently about halfway through stage 2, our applicant work window part of the MWR process. And I believe at the last presentation, the timeline was unsure from the province. That's now been solidified as 29 months from the date that they received our application number, which brings our deadline to November 28th, 2024. So about 1 more year left to go. This timeline was decreased from the standard 36 months due to the previous non-compliance letter that was issued to the city. On the flip side, the ministry has assessed this as a highly complex and offered to, strive to complete their review portion of stage 3 of a period of within about 12 months. On to the fun stuff. Our 2023 sampling program, as I mentioned, was the larger component that we've been working on this past year. We went out bi-weekly and did sampling within our treatment facility, as well as monthly, and did sampling within the river. We sampled 5 locations in the river and then multiple locations within the treatment facility. At each location, sampling about 20 parameters for things like solids, nutrients, organic matter, metals, and bacteriological information. The image you see on the screen is our sewage lagoons. You can see the Elk River running through the center there. All the red dots represent a specific location where samples were taken at each of these events. The yellow dot on the left side was an alternate sample location at Aeration Basin 3, where we would sample if we were not discharging to the Elk River. In addition to those biweekly and monthly samples, there was a period throughout the summer where we sampled 5 times within 30 days. This was a specific requirement of the ministry to capture a lot of data in a shorter period of time and during low flows in the Elk River. Additional field work that was carried out over the course of the past year was mapping out the initial dilution zone. And this is determining how our effluent disperses within the river. And then that gets fed back into a model that we can look at and how it would change under varying flows. And then also completed a benthic invertebrate survey where we went into the river and looked at some of these species that live just below our outfall and just above the outfall, and could compare if those communities varied. On the samples from that particular event or results are not ready yet. We're anticipating them in December. As I mentioned in the report, our treatment facility discharge location does have a complex component related to where this channel has been migrating since the outfall was installed about 10 years ago. The image you can see on the screen now shows how the rivers changed between 2019 and 2021. On the image on the right-hand side, you can see our outfall location lands somewhere in the middle of this little side channel that's formed. So to better understand what's going on here, the project team installed a flow meter just downstream of our outfall, helping us model not only how our effluent would disperse within the river, but also within this side channel. As I mentioned, this development of the side channel obviously impacts the rate in which our treated effluent can mix with the Elk River, and is a consideration that the project team is factoring in the work plan moving forward. We're working with the ministry to seek clarification on the requirements side and how our effluent limits are set, specifically related to this. The good news is there's no evidence so far that indicate any detrimental impact related to it, but it is something that we need to consider and think about moving forward. Again, as I mentioned in the report, pretty good news. Based on our current review of what we've seen in effluent quality, the treatment facility leads us to the conclusion that except for the total ammonia nitrogen requirement, we're currently meeting quality requirements for applicable regulations. So for what the facility is designed to treat, it's doing a good job. One of the other kind of neat things that we noticed over the course of the 2023 sampling related to past years, we've seen an increase in quality, so better results than we have in previous years, likely attributed to some of the additional attention that our facilities had the past couple of years, such as desludging in 2022, as well as the addition of to wastewater staff, I believe later 2022 as well, which just allows crews more time to modify things as things need to be changed or just pay more attention to critical issues as they arise. So next steps here, for the last month and a bit, we're going to complete our sampling program, hopefully wrapping up at the end of December, clarify some of those outfall requirements I mentioned, and then the focus in 2024 is to complete preliminary and detailed design phases of required treatment, if required, as well as complete some of those accompanying reports, such as our operating plans, I&I study, overflow mitigation plan, and reclaimed water use feasibility study, and then submit all our application information to the province in just about a year. That's all I got. Open for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Baird. Councillor Ramirez.
Thanks, Your Worship. Just wondering, in terms of timeline, are we where we are supposed to be as of today?
Yep.
Towards the MWR, are we ahead of schedule?
Councillor Ramirez through Mayor Milligan. Yeah, based on the plan that was put forward by the consultant team, we're about where we expected to be at this time. Yeah, I guess the one difference is just the clarification of those outfall requirements, but that's moving along as we would expect it to.
Other questions from council? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Milligan. Just a comment. It's good to see that the additional staff and maintenance is having the desired effect.
Yeah, agreed. Mr. Baird, you said as part of the focus of work in 2024 is the pre-design for potential redevelopment of the treatment system, if required. Is that still an open question that we may not have to redesign, rebuild our treatment facility?
It's a great question, Mayor Milligan. Thank you. The one parameter, one thing, as I mentioned, total ammonia nitrogen is something that our treatment facility wasn't intended to treat and doesn't target specifically. And so that's the one thing that will likely need to be augmented in our treatment process. So yes, likely that we'll have to put in an additional process to treat those. Well, does that answer your question?
It does. Yeah, it does. Because I thought we were on a track to completely revamp our entire process. But if that's not the case, then that's very encouraging. Mr. Baranowski, you have a comment?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just don't want to leave you with the impression that this isn't phase one of a multi-phase project, including potentially a liquid waste management plan and a new facility down the road. This does provide us a way to gain compliance currently. However, capacity for growth is not going to be significant as part of this process, and we will have to consider what we do long term, and that may very well include development of a new system.
Okay, thank you. And is that so? If this is phase one, like we don't have to have a fully redesigned system by the end of 2024. Is that correct? Or we potentially have to add a process to our current system to continue in compliance, but it is phase one of a larger, if I'm understanding this correct, of a larger question.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Baird. Appreciate it. And sorry for stealing your thunder on the side channel. It was just an opportunity.
No, it's good. Nailed it. Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You knew I read your report in advance anyway.
Thanks.
Item 7.5, the planning department memo to council. I trust council's had a review. Any comments, input, questions for presumably Director Lennox, if there are any? Seeing none. It was useful information. Thank you to the planning department for that. We will move to adjourn, but immediately following this meeting, we'll hold the scheduled special meeting. And I don't think we'll recess out of respect for folks' time. We'll move right along. So if there's no other business, I will move to, or I will adjourn the committee of the whole. Have you noted that? Yes. Thank you. At 7:46?
At 7:45.
Okay. Thank you. Ouch. On that note, we'll move right into a special meeting of council held at 7:45 on November 21st, 2023. And once again, acknowledge that the city of Fernie is located within Kukinamakis, the unceded traditional territory of the Yakutat Nucleate, and we recognize that we live and work in their vast lands. Kanahunik are from Yakutat Nucleate and are members of the Tanaha-speaking peoples of British Columbia, Idaho, and Montana. I'll call the meeting to order and ask for a mover and a seconder for the approval of the agenda. Moved by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Nixon. Any discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And now I'll hand it over to Mr. McConnell. Council Procedure Bylaw number 2446, Amendment Bylaw number 2504, 2023.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the opportunity to present this tonight. There we go. Thank you. So thank you. As I indicated last week, the intent was to do 3 readings of council next week, and it was brought to my attention by a person more astute towards timing than myself on that, in order for us to ensure that we provide the proper public notice to the procedure bylaw as required. If council desired any amendments to the bylaw next week, we wouldn't be able to meet those public notice requirements. So we're here tonight to ensure that we capture those prior to publishing our public notice, as we have to give basically 1 week notice to the newspaper in order to get the advertising in on time. So there's a bit of an amended timeline. It's on this slide. Tonight is the 3 readings at special council. Once 3 readings provided, we will provide public notice per sections 124.3 and 94 of the community charter, which will include 2 weeks publication in the newspaper. And then we'll bring it back to December 12th for adoption at a regular meeting of council. The application of the new bylaw would not happen until the new council or the new year, as it would be effective for the next regular meeting. So the items that are in the bylaw that is attached to your agenda is with respect to the items that were agreed upon last week. So in sections 3.1.2, 313, 316, the start time for the meetings will be 6:30, as was discussed last week. The amendment updates the 3610 is with respect to the use of technology, where we added in language that it allows for laptops for participation and for access to the agenda. And then the new notice of motion process and policy are also still in there, but please note that I did move the location of the notice of motion process. I didn't have it, I had it in 3.7 last week, which created a whole bunch of changes of numbering and so on. just was easier to do it in 3.16 and thereby make those changes a little easier to manage. And it still works in that location. Please note as well that Articles 3.3.3 and 313 both still reference the other methods to introduce a motion outside of the notice of motion process. This essentially enables council to deal with matters that might arise on an emergent or timely basis that weren't on the agenda in any other way. So the recommendation tonight is for council to provide first, second, and third readings to the amending bylaw. And then the next steps would be that if that receives first, second, third reading, that we would do the public notice regarding the changes. Adoption would be regular council meeting on December the 12th. As well, at the December 12th meeting, we will bring forward that notice of motion policy, which was attached last week. And then those would apply to the 2024 council meetings. So that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Questions from council, comments? Councilor McIsaac.
Thank you, Worship. I apologize in advance. The change for 3.16.3 with regards to the notice of motion, when the subject of the notice of motion, if the proponent council member is unable to attend. Currently, the wording says it will be postponed to the next meeting at which the council member who submitted the notice of motion is in attendance. I think this is problematic. I think it should be may be postponed. It may be urgent enough that the person who brought the notice of motion forward wants it to be heard, even if they're not in attendance. Not only that, but I think it speaks stronger to the fact that council is a body. It's not dependent on a particular individual person being present for it to move forward and do business. I think it's considerate if it's personal to them and to wait for them to be there and so on, but I think it should be an option as opposed to it should be a may as opposed to be a will. That's my only comment.
Thank you. Mr. McConnell, any comments?
I would accept that, and I would suggest that the method which I would propose that we deal with that is for Council McIsaac to suggest an amendment right now prior to the readings of the bylaw, and that we would accept an amendment to 3.16 sub.3 that the wording with respect to that be amended from will be postponed to may be postponed, and I would ask that that be moved as an amendment to the bylaw.
So moved, Your Worship.
Seconded by Councilor Hamilton. Any other discussion?
Before you call the question, Your Worship, I want to make sure that we've captured that.
Okay.
Do you need anything else? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that opportunity.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Actually, I think that's an excellent amendment. That's a great catch. Thank you. And I did want to comment, Mr. McConnell, on this bylaw with the track changes version. Will that then become the bylaw, or is it the signing of this amendment piece?
So the amending bylaw is the bylaw, the 3504. Sorry, 2504. I apologize. The 2504 is the amending bylaw, official bylaw, but we are obligated to provide a consolidated bylaw on the website so people can see what was essentially in the track changes.
Okay, thank you. It's just that in the track changes, there are a couple of typos, not significant. I wouldn't want to point them out here, but
we have authority to amend typos.
Perfect. Please do that. Councilor Ramirez.
Sorry, Your Worship, have we changed the adding agenda item? Sorry, maybe I was not paying attention. Is it going to be clunky like it was? No, right?
Yeah, we haven't changed that. I think we were in agreement last time we discussed it, that it's used infrequently and there are other ways to get emergent items onto the agenda. And as such, we thought we'd leave it in all its clunkiness for future chuckles.
But yes, but we have cleaned up the notice of motion. So we've been using it for notices of motion. In this case, when council members are bringing forward a notice of motion, there's a clearer, more concise process.
I just have to get used to the other thing that I have never used before. the other option that
Fair,
we have.
yeah. Other questions or comments? Mr. Baranowski, is there something that?
No, your worship, I'm sorry. I was just communicating with Ms. Daniel about training session and reference sheets that we've discussed as part of this, because there are some new mechanisms, and supporting council in their effective use is part of legislative and corporate services priorities.
Okay, well, thank you.
Apologies for the whisper.
No. Seeing no other questions, unless I've missed some. Are you empowered to read your own?
I would like to read my own recommendation, plus I'll be adding language because we've amended it.
Please do.
So that's that council provide first, second, and third reading of council procedure bylaw number 2446, amendment bylaw number 2504, 2023 as amended.
Moved by Councillor Hamilton, seconded by Councillor McIsaac. Any other discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Not at all. And on that note, we will call the special meeting adjourned. Thank you.